So we will call the November meeting of the Narberth Planning Commission to order. Our agenda, in addition to regular announcements, is one subdivision land development application for 650 Montgomery Avenue. We will discuss the green buildings, apartment buildings in the 5B district, mixed-use buildings in the 5A district. And we will discuss the recommendation to recommend the approval of the revision to the subdivision and land development ordinance. So before we begin, I heard today that there was discussion that the application for 714 Montgomery Avenue would be discussed tonight. Is anyone here in the audience to discuss that application? I'm sorry.
No idea about that.
That's because our Zoom is important.
I'll use my outdoor voice. So I heard today that there was an impression that on our agenda tonight was the application 714 Montgomery Avenue, which is the price house.
Right.
Is anyone here tonight to discuss that topic?
Yes.
Okay, so that is not on our agenda tonight. So we do accept public comment on the issues in our agenda as we move through the agenda, but we accept public comment on other topics at the end of the meeting. It's not on our agenda.
That's fine. We'll wait till the end of the meeting.
Well,
Okay.
can we offer them to make their comments? I mean, they shouldn't have to sit through the entire meeting. I agree. It could be a very long meeting.
Yeah.
Okay, it is a long meeting though, and I want to make sure we get to our business. So, but, okay, so is everyone agreeable to hearing this?
Yeah.
Let's
Is that good with you, Adam? Okay, because he's larger than the agenda. Okay, so I will reverse what I just said, and we will make a public comment to the beginning of the meeting on matters.
Well, actually, I mean, we live in a meeting house, so it's actually very timely that we're here for him to present the.
But if you'd like to
I know
make-
it's too late, but.
If you like to make comments on any other matter, this would be great. All I ask is you just tell us your name and address, and then we'll let you go ahead.
My name is Sue Swift. I live at 346 Meeting House Lane, the old toll house. And this is Linda Hearn. And it's Linda Hearn House, and I live at 3 Meeting House Lane.
Jordan Casella at 338. Meeting House.
Welcome.
Which one?
Last name is
Gazella.
what's the first name?
George.
What was the address? 338 Meeting House. And Linda was 33 Meeting House there? 338.
He's talking to me.
Oh.
333 Meeting House Lane, and my last name is spelled O-W-S.
O-W-S-T-O-N.
O-W-S is the same as you.
And
Linda Hearn, H-E-A-R-N.
okay, so H-E-R-N dash.
Linda Hearn, O-W-S-T-O-N.
There's Sue Smith.
Swift, like Taylor.
And
346. Yeah, I mean, we just wanted to make sure, like, we just wanted to be kind of involved in the planning for 714 Montgomery, since we live on very long Meeting House, and we, because of the primary address of Montgomery Avenue, the building that will be going up on Meeting House will be, will have the same, won't have to like adhere to the residential standards in terms of height. So, I mean, there's already a huge building going up at Albrecht's. It's a small street. There's already been a child hit on our street. This one, you know, have a voice in the plan on our street, trying to make the light on our Avenue. We have a lot of little kids now. Police are not enforcing this now. So yeah, I mean, can you give us information on how we can be involved in it?
Mm-hmm. Well, so first of all, there is a application that's been made for that development, which you can look at on the webpage, on the borough's webpage. That application is on hold because both the Planning Commission and Council offered some critiques of or comments on the proposal, and the the applicant is going back and going to come back with another proposal that will, it will still involve an apartment building in the back of the lot, but it will be configured differently than he originally proposed.
Why is that?
In that district, the 5B district, we already allow for mixed use buildings in that district, which could include apartments. So right now, under the current rules, someone could build a mixed use building that has like shops on the ground floor and apartments above.
And that's on Montgomery Avenue or?
No, that could be anywhere on his lot. He could do
Anywhere,
anywhere on his lot. He could do that.
What, and why is that? Because the address is on Montgomery Avenue?
Yes.
Even though it's all gonna be on Meeting House?
That's right. That's because it's a very oddly shaped lot that goes from Montgomery to Meeting House. Yeah, but that's why. It's because it's obvious.
Right there. In some buildings right there, so can't touch that.
So this is probably one part of the plan. This is our street. I mean, there's gonna be a huge building going up at Allracks.
Right.
It's gonna be 25 new apartments there.
Right.
There's gonna be tons of traffic. So we just wanna know how do we stay involved in this process?
Well, I mean, so first of all, I just want to be clear. The rules that allow for that kind of development, they exist now. Now we're going to talk a little bit tonight about tweaking some of those rules. That's under item 3B. But in general, it's because that's on Montgomery Avenue, was envisioned when the zoning was created to be an area of more intense development.
When was it created?
6 years ago, and then what was it before that? What was allowed there before that? Do you all remember?
No.
It was, the rules that we have in place were put in place about 6 years ago.
So it most likely would have been zoned the same as the rest of them.
There's probably more intense
Which
commercial.
has the same commercial,
Which, of course, Montgomery Avenue is very different than Meeting House Lane.
but the parcel touches it's
Understood, but, I'm sure you're all aware that Meeting House Lane is different than Montgomery Avenue.
Yeah, but the rules relate to the parcel, and the parcel fronts Montgomery Avenue. It would even if it's in that district, and so that's what the
we
rules.
understand what your point. He's just explaining what the site zoning allows to do.
Okay.
And that's as a result of the rules that were passed in 2017, I think, 2016. 2016. So that's the situation.
At the time, was there any mention of like a large piece of land like that encroaches onto a residential street?
Well, I think if the rules at the time were created to try and create something of a separation between that kind of development and the adjacent neighborhoods.
Say it again.
At the time, the rules were created so that there would be a separation between
Commercial and residential?
Yeah, between what happened on those lots on Montgomery Avenue and the adjacent neighborhoods.
Between
That was
the lots on Montgomery Avenue and what else?
The adjacent neighborhood, the neighborhoods next door to those.
It's our neighborhood.
Yes.
But
So-
nobody cared, nobody,
The zoning requires a setback, or it's supposed to require a setback between the commercial properties and the residential neighborhood behind Montgomery Avenue.
so what does that mean?
It means there's supposed to be a piece of land, it's like the part of the parcel has to be kept open or that it depends on, essentially. Anyway, that was the intent, correct?
Yes.
So that there would be some spacing between any new buildings. The other thing that's really changed in the past year or two is the historic district ordinance. Essentially you can't tear down the Price House without the Borough Council approving it, which was not the case until a year or two ago. So that until a year or two ago, we could have demolished the existing structure and you know, put up the maximum size building on that parcel that is on the property. Right?
Right, so now they have to keep that house where it is. And so to build on the lot, they have to build on the back part of the lot.
And you guys are fine with that? You think that's no big deal?
We don't have, one, the rules allow that, so yes.
Who made the rules? Did you guys make the rules?
The planning commission and the borough council made those rules,
So, that's
you
the,
know, 5 or 6 years ago. Some of us run the planning commission.
and when you made the rules that you thought that would be,
Well, can I interrupt for a moment?
yeah.
Please.
So the rules apply to all of Montgomery Avenue. Montgomery Avenue is seen as a commercial
Which is
district.
very different than meeting house plan.
Absolutely.
Right.
The problem is that this lot is an odd-shaped lot that happens to have 2 streets.
Right.
It comes through 2 streets.
So it's
And
not,
nobody foresaw what could potentially be developed on that.
right, so,
That was not probably done properly.
Well, nor did we
But
anticipate the historic district preserving the Price House.
well, I thought you wanted to, but not want to see the Price House run down, that would be.
Well, neither do we.
But that-
Neither do we. So your situation is an unfortunate consequence of a number of situations colliding on that. If you will.
What
But
happened?
I will say that having participated in the entire process of the new zoning code, there has always been considerable concern about the fact that a commercial district would butt up against a residential district, in that, you know, what could be done to allow development of the commercial district and protect as much as possible those residential properties that front or back on that commercial property. You know, there's probably no perfect solution. You know, if a commercial property is going to be developed, but the code was written, as far as I think we could reasonably have done, with an eye of trying to mitigate the effect on the residential properties as much as possible. And I will say in our discussions, you know, in the preliminary discussions that we've had with that developer, that has been a constant subject that has come up over and over again.
It's going to be driveway. Okay, right now there's a driveway that comes onto the meeting house lane from the amber shop. So is that going to stay? Is it going to be coming in and out from North Street?
That is too early to say because we haven't formally seen any new proposals.
And how about, do you know anything about walking underneath like they did at the Gallup Forest?
That is, in our last meeting, we requested that, but until we actually see a new application, we can't say what they're actually going to propose. What we requested is they set the back, any new building a certain distance from the houses nearby. We requested that the parking be underground, or cut in, is a slope there, or like cut into the hill somehow. And that is some of the feedback we gave, you know, the developer. To come back and work on.
I'm the third generation in our house. We've had it on family.
are you the adjacent to the property?
No.
Yeah.
So, 4 grandchildren are at the house for a bit, and they're pretty, I think I have to keep them back. What's going on now? And your family's been in about 70 years, right, George? Yeah, I just remember when they were built. When the brick house was built. Yeah. So I'm just saying, you know, it's just, I'm sad. I'm
Yes, the question is, do we have any,
May I make a suggestion? I'm with the county, I'm not for the planning.
I just wonder who all you guys, I don't know.
Yeah, so everyone else sitting up here is a resident of Narberth and are volunteers who have offered to serve on the planning commission to try to help good planning in the borough. I'm employed by Montgomery County as a professional consultant to help the borough with planning issues. I've only been working with Narberth for about a year and a half now. But
What's your name?
my name is Chloe Moore. I'm happy to give you my card.
So why don't we go around and say who we got?
Sure.
Adam Crom, I'm on Elmwood Avenue.
What's your name?
Adam Crom,
I grew up with that.
great.
Jim Spear,
Todd Bressie, I live in Foxhall.
Heidi Boyce on Grayling.
Dave Brower, Forest.
Jim Cornwell, Windale Road.
So,
They're all your neighbors and they're all volunteers. So there's been 2 meetings already that have been about that property, and there's minutes on the borough's website, and there's plan sheets from what the developer originally proposed, and there's recordings of those meetings, right? There's probably
God willing.
Zoom recordings on the YouTube page. So you can go take a look at what has already happened, and then that will come back, the applicant.
Well, we looked at the plan, and it doesn't have a height for the building.
I don't.
It has, there's a gym, there's gonna be a gym on Meeting House Lane.
that's something we asked them to reconsider.
Was that?
That's something we asked them to reconsider. In that zone, you can build a 45-foot pillar.
You can build a what?
In that
We
zone.
understand that, so how we
Well, there was a disagreement at the meeting about what the zoning for that parcel allows. Disagreement between the developer, both the applicant, and various other members of the commission. It was a disagreement. And the other thing is that the zoning is intended to promote business development along Montgomery Avenue, not necessarily business development on Meeting House Lane. And so, but it requires mixed-use development, essentially. And so I think some people's impression is that it would be better to have essentially residential use on Meeting House Lane instead of a commercial building.
Well, yeah, anybody on Meeting House Lane would agree with that.
And
I
so
think you would agree with that on your street too.
I think that's where things are trending. Is that correct?
That is, we asked the developer to consider a strategy that would not have commercial uses like a gym or anything like that on Meeting House Lane. We asked them to consider just having residential uses on Meeting House Lane.
So is it up to them?
Not entirely. We'll be talking a little bit tonight on item 3B about whether we should allow apartment buildings in that area so that there wouldn't be commercial uses.
So you are going to be talking about it.
We're talking about the 5B district, which includes
How many of these districts are? How do we find that out?
There is a zoning map on the borough's website.
I'm sorry, Matt.
I'm happy to answer, talk to you about how zoning works and for you guys. I mean, you should come here and listen to the talk to these folks, but
conditional use section. Multiple buildings.
I'm happy to chat about how all this works. And I can send me an email to me if you don't have trouble finding the zoning map. I can send you a link to
I
it.
would also say, I mean, I'm personally sympathetic to if you're concerned about traffic safety.
Of course we are.
Right. Well,
And if
so,
you child is different car.
well, and so I guess what we're pointing out is that the site hasn't been developed. It's currently, I think, not used for anything much. And so that risk exists today because of whoever's speeding on that street.
Yeah, I've been to meetings.
Right, apart from the development. And so it might, I mean, it's a separate issue from development, but it's certainly something that I'm personally interested in. What can we do to mitigate that kind of risk, right? How do we get people to slow down and drive safely through it? It's not necessarily something that a developer on that parcel can fix, but it may be something that the borough should be taking a closer look at. So.
No, that would be, I mean, went to meetings years ago about that, but nothing really ever seemed to come of that either. Still, you know, people still go speeding down, get so late. With the bridge closed, we have less traffic, but back to the residents. But are you, I guess our question is, so it's really up to the developer and they can do whatever they want? So,
No, they can only do things within a certain set of rules.
but their rules will apply to the commercial, zoning.
The rules, the way zoning works is the rules apply to the whole of Montgomery Avenue.
Right.
And so, although it is, to be honest, kind of challenging in Montgomery Avenue because there's so many different kinds of lots.
Yeah.
But in general, there's one set of rules that apply to Montgomery Avenue. Now, there's another set of rules that apply because that property has a historic building on it. So some buildings on some properties on Montgomery Avenue are part of our historic district. So those properties, and that's in the maps that they were pointing out, those properties have extra rules about what can or can't be done. And that what Mr. Cornwell was saying, there's kind of a overlapping of those two sets of rules that create, you know, the kind of circumstance that we have with that property. So currently, in that district, a property owner like Adam sitting next to you can build a mixed-use building that has commercial uses on the ground floor and apartments above, or offices above. And that's what was proposed for 714 was commercial uses on the ground floor of Meeting House and apartments above, because that's what the zoning allows for. Our reactions, as everyone has said, were that commercial uses on Meeting House Lane are not a good idea, that the building should be set back a distance from the adjacent neighborhood to create, you know, a separation between them. That, what else? So there's that, and setback, and the parking should be underground as much as possible. Those are the main bits of feedback. In that conversation, we realized that it would be better if that would just be an apartment building and not a building with shops on the ground floor. So tonight, one of the things we're going to be talking about is whether or not we should allow apartment buildings in that area, so that we don't have commercial creeping up the streets into those neighborhoods.
Not just the street either, but all the other streets that intersect.
So,
There's already gonna be, it looks like 5 or 6 commercial spots on the Albrecht side.
right, and that was always a commercial site, so that didn't concern us as much. This wasn't always a commercial site, so that concerned us as much. It concerned us. You can also build a 45-foot high building in that neighborhood. That's the way it's been for years. Your building's what, 43, 40? It's been like that.
How many stories is that?
Currently 3, but we're considering allowing 4 stories without allowing extra height. And that's, so, you know, there's different kinds of, right. So there's different kinds of objectives to balance. One is the preservation of the Price House, which is the oldest house in the borough, which actually needs to be moved in order for this to happen. Another one is to build underground parking, which is hugely expensive to build underground parking, which we think is a benefit to the borough to have underground parking. And so that is why.
Would that be on Meeting House Lane?
The underground.
The underground part will be on Meeting House
It will be
Lane.
under the building. That's what we requested. So we'll have to see how they do this.
Like the elm,
They're in the parking lot?
like the elm, like the elm.
I wanted to like the elm. That's-
Yeah. So we'll be looking at a parking lot.
No, you won't actually. The parking will be.
We haven't seen a new proposal, so we can't say.
Like the elm. Think of how the elm works, if you're familiar with it. Okay, we'll take a look at the elm and you'll see that there's actually a 53 space parking facility underneath the apartment. All under. Okay, so that takes cars off the street. That means there's no surface parking lot. Everybody's catalytic converter is safe. So it's a real benefit to the community for that to be a feature of a residential. So that's one of the drums we are meeting in this discussion with this developer. I think we should,
So that will be discussed. The idea of an apartment building in the 5B district overall will be one of the things we discuss later on tonight. The way you can keep in touch is really we post our agendas a day or two before our meeting, usually on the Friday before our meeting, and that's simply because that's when we know what the agenda is going to be. There's a lot of work that goes on the week before to find out what's ready for our agenda. And, you know, sometimes the council meets Thursday before and they put new things on our agenda for the next Monday. So usually on Friday before our meeting, that's when our agenda comes out. Anytime there's an application, so like when the person for 714 Montgomery has a new application, the borough will put that on its website. Under, there's a place where you can look up subdivision and land development plans. And as soon as those come in, those are put up there. And those are usually up about 5 weeks or so before they come to our meeting. So usually up a month, at least 5-6 weeks ahead of time. And that is posted so everyone can see it. And then our agendas come out a couple of days before our meetings. And that's really, I mean, what will happen is on Friday, the borough puts out its calendar and it'll tell you what meetings are coming up. If there's a planning commission meeting, then you can link to that and look up our agenda. And that's how you know what's going on. And honestly, we would all wish we could set our agendas earlier, but because we're spending the weekend reviewing piles of documents. But Friday is usually when we know what our agenda is going to be. So that's the way you can keep posted about this. Occasionally, but not with any routine, council might ask an applicant to come make a presentation at a council meeting. And the only way to know about that is, I mean, I don't even know about those. To know about that is to watch the council agendas. Sorry that it's still like a manual process that you have to go look for the agendas, but that's the best answer I can give right now. Usually, if we're considering an action, we will post like a report or background information about that along with our agenda. I don't know if today's got posted because like 2 out of 3 people in the borough staff were gone and they said they couldn't post it. They were out today. So, but usually if we're considering like a zoning amendment or the reconsideration of some kind of code, we will put a report up on our webpage before the meeting so people can see what we're going to be talking about. So if you watch that part of the borough's webpage where the planning commission meetings are announced, you can find that information. That's the best.
So
often people will email me in between meetings, which is fine. I'm happy to answer informational questions like, will this be on the agenda? But I don't answer policy questions by email. We'd like to have those conversations in public. It's like some of the questions you're asking me, I would not answer by email because I think they need to be answered in public. But if you were to ask me, is this going to be on the agenda? That's something I could tell you. And our email is actually, it's on our agenda. It's on the back of our agenda. That's how you can send an email to me.
I think I sent an email to everybody on this committee. If not,
well,
maybe I sent it to the borough council.
So I don't, everyone has their own policy about this, but I have an email address which is published on our agenda, and you can email me, and if it's something I can answer right away, I do. And if it's something I feel is part of a public discussion, we have it here, like we're having it here now. I think everyone should be able to take part in that. But if it's like a factual question, like when's your meeting, or is this on the agenda? I'm happy to answer it. And people often submit letters that way, which we read at the planning commission meeting. And if I get something like that, I circulate it to all the planning commissioners so that they see what we're getting. So that's another way to keep in touch. That's how we work with email. Yeah.
So I have, so I guess, I mean, I don't know if it's cynical. Do you care what the neighbors on the street have to say? I mean, I really,
That's why we're here. Because we care what the neighbors think. That's what we are all about,
Okay,
is making the town of Narberth as good as it can be for the people who live here. Now, we could easily have just given this developer free rein, torn up the zoning code and said, do whatever you want. We could be just like Houston. That's what they do in Houston. But that's not what we're about.
so
You
we
need to
do,
know that. So if you pay attention to what we do, what the council does, you will see a pattern of a deep concern for the well-being, for the welfare of the members of the community. That's what we're charged with doing. Now, is the zoning code the perfect document? No. Have we worked on it for years and years and years and years to improve it? Yes. And I mean years and years and years of discussions like this one to make it as fair as possible. It doesn't mean it's perfect. So you should stay tuned to what happens with this application. That's easy for you to do. Now, you care deeply about it because you live there.
right.
I would care deeply if I lived there too, even more deeply than we all do. It's a tiny town. It's only 320 acres. One of the smallest towns on the planet.
No, I grew up
So
I know.
don't feel that you're being ignored, but stay tuned. Okay? I think we should move on, Tom.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Thank you for your time.
Well,
Yeah,
excellent for me.
so, I mean, can these zoning things be changed, these zoning laws be changed, since you said it's an unfortunate consequence of very, very hard planning, but, or is it a done
We're
deal?
working closely with the developer to make it as good as it can be, given the circumstance and what the rules are. When he submitted his first plans, that's when we couldn't change the zoning code on him now. It's the zoning code that's there that he's got to work with, but we're all trying to work with him on it too. And he's been receptive to our comments.
And
So sorry, you go ahead.
if you stay for a little while, you'll see
Yeah.
that there is a zoning change proposed for that district that you might be interested in. We're going to discuss it. It's on the agenda for tonight.
Okay, so let's move on then. Thanks for coming out tonight. We will move on. So first of all, I didn't take the role. Everyone's here. Jen Han is on, Shielski Han is on Zoom. So we have 6 people present and 1 present on Zoom. We have Chloe Moore from Montgomery County Planning Commission with us. Is Kevin Walsh on the line?
No.
Okay, so is there any?
Yes.
Kevin Walsh?
I'm here, guys.
Okay, I'm going to take note of that, Kevin. And we have 3 more members of the public here, 3 to speak on 714 Montgomery and an applicant for 650 Montgomery Ave. So we take the roll. Chair's update. Actually, it's something funny I wanted to update you because I got a pass. Mostly because I can't remember. So we will move on to review of October minutes, which we received over the weekend. I would like to ask if anyone has any comments or questions about the corrections about the minutes that you would like to suggest.
I have one comment.
Okay. It's sort of odd to hear like a voice from, but go ahead.
We're sick in this house, so I'm sparing you all whatever it is that we all have. Anyway, Adam, before I say anything, I do want to express my gratitude for your doing these minutes. They're always, very on point, captures key points. There's one thing in from last month that I would like to see tweaked just a little bit. And that is on the 3 under, what number is that? Roman numeral 3, B, the 3 requirements: carbon reduction, construction, energy efficiency. And I would change that last one to renewable energy. Just to,
Instead of carbon reduction in building operations.
yeah, yeah,
Okay. Change that right now.
awesome. Thank you.
Any other comments? Is that it? Did you have anything else, Jen?
No, nothing else. Thank you.
Any other comments or corrections? Okay, would someone make a motion then to approve the minutes?
Approve the minutes of the October meeting
As amended by Jen.
as amended by Jen.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, good. So Jim seconds and Jim made the motion and Dave seconded. Is all in favor of any further discussion about the minutes?
Glad someone read that.
All in favor of approving the minutes as amended? Any opposed? Okay. So they are approved as amended. I will do my best to get them to the borough for posting. I'm a little behind on that.
Can I make my 30-second happen?
Hang on a second. Jim, are you doing something with the minutes?
I was trying to get the Jen on the screen.
Okay. Chloe, please let us know about the county's comprehensive planning efforts.
Okay, the county is starting on a new countywide comprehensive plan. Anyone who lives or works in Montgomery County is welcome to take a look. montcopa.org/Montco 2050. There's a survey, there's this thing called a Padlet where you make comments. So go check it out. Thank you. I'll probably say more things about it in the future. But
I'm sorry, that's the 2050 plan it's called?
yes, that's right.
It's Montco starting the planning process.
Yeah, correct. Expected to be adopted in 2025. So we're just starting in a multi-year process.
3 years? Okay.
Yeah. Process, but yeah.
You may try your luck at sending an announcement to the borough.
I should do
That
that.
they can put in their newsletter.
Sounds good.
Right above stream watch. Okay, thank you, Chloe. So we'll move on to subdivision and land development, 650 Montgomery Avenue. Adam, thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you.
Let us know what's up.
Hello, everybody. It's like Groundhog's Day, deja vu again.
Yeah.
So initially, for the record, Adam Rosenzweig.
Can you hear a second? Are you guys interested in seeing his board? You can kind of come around and watch.
You can
Have a seat if you want.
Yeah.
Okay.
Adam Rosenzweig, actually really developer for 650 Montgomery Avenue. Have appeared here. Initially had a final land development approval back, I believe, in August of 2020. We then had a modification to our plan to accommodate what we thought was a single tenant user who, unfortunately, after we received approval, left us, which then put us back to breaking up our retail sector into individual bays, which then precipitated us having to make additional modifications to the actual civil plan. Initially, basically, this is a civil plan that we just resubmitted. You're not going to be able to really tell any difference from here because basically nothing from here changed at all. The changes more or less that I have today that I wanted to bring up to everybody's attention are this. So this was the called Q3 2020 approval. If you recall, we agreed and we're going to build what we call the grand staircase that was basically, this is the Montgomery Avenue, Meeting House Lane point of egress and ingress. And next to it, we were going to build a retaining wall that was 7 feet above ground the entire way from Meeting House all the way up to Montgomery, all the way up to the drive line here, have a stairwell, and this would have given everybody access into and out of the building for ADA and for fire code. We then thought we had a tenant who was going to occupy everything, including some lower level space, and we've since dropped the patio to be at grade on Meeting House level. So this would allow people to walk in without having to go up the stairwell. And then we had basically a ADA ramp that ramped all the way up from here up to grade around here. That was a way to take out, if you recall, we had almost a foot of grade change between the corner here and the corner here. So when the tenant no longer was present, We went back to multiple bays. The challenge is we took away all their secondary means of egress, their fire, and their ability to exit for trash. So what we did in our proposal that we just resubmitted was, we're here, there was no grand staircase, like I said, it was at grade, and you just ramp up as you come around. We put the staircase back in at the cutout. So we still have at grade from here, and I'll show you a picture in a minute. This is still at grade on Meeting House right here, as it was here, except having a ramp, we now have to put a staircase and a lift back in, because we have to give people the ability to exit secondary means of egress. And that is a substantial change that we've resubmitted. And with that too, there was a very minor change up on the front related to access too. We had to put back in a 3-set stairwell in the front that we took out for a single tenant, because we had to play with the grade change back in the front. So.
The distance between the staircase and this is the sidewalk here.
It is.
All sidewalk.
It is, yeah. Yeah, yeah, it's right there. And
why would you not, why would you not put the staircase up against the building? Why is there that notch?
2 reasons. One, we need to have a lift.
That's where a lift will be?
The lift.
The mechanical lift?
Yeah, I realized this morning they didn't show it here, but it's on the plans that we submitted. If you look here, there was a lift that was put in behind it. That same exact lift is going to be put right back there.
Okay.
Yeah. And the reason we did that is we figured it's nicer to see a staircase in the front than a mechanical lift right on the front of the street, which is why we put the lift behind there.
Yeah, I just wasn't showing the drawing.
Yes. Good eye.
The lift is for people, not for lower.
It's for both. It's for both. We need it for ADA purposes, so it'll be an ADA approved lift. And it'll also be an ADA lift for any kind of service or loader that needs to come in and go.
The hand triggers.
Exactly. Yeah. And then last and finally, we have finally settled on elevations and renderings of what it's going to look like. Since we've started, I think we've made a very significant improvement. We started with stucco and paneling, and we are now at basically limestone and brick.
Where's the traffic team?
It's in the kitchen.
In Gildings.
So no, we've gone to a limestone-esque type finish. Again, frankly, I don't know what that's going to be exactly, because we have this, but it's going to look like that. And then this upper part will be brick.
Are those actual tenants or are those just sample tenants? Not really a daycare.
I don't have a lease signed here, no.
So the limestone-esque could be probably not limestone, cast stone.
Cast stone, exactly.
But not dry.
No drive. No drive. We had drive it, actually, if you look, we had drive it initially in the rear.
You don't have to show me.
Okay. We took it out. It will be above the storefronts, but everything from 9 feet down will be cast stone or limestone acid. That finish. This will be your standard, drive it above the storefront. But everything else above here will be brick. This will be brick. We took no, I didn't forget which, remember we put this was all brick and somebody didn't like it. It was just all flat paneling. So we just put an inlay design here on this side, which is facing. We did another inlay design up here as well. Yeah, just to break up the monotony of the brick.
We have a couple questions. Is there any relief needed for this? It's a change in the plan. Is there any changes to landscaping along the street as a result of your reconfiguration of the wall?
I think the answer to that question is no. Look, there's obviously some changes, but we're not removing any trees. I think we're just relocating the tree basins. We actually are going to go back to what we had. Now I remember. We're going to go back to what we had before. If you recall, we had some tree cutouts in the first one. So those 3 get put back along the front here. And then along here, there's just going to be cutouts on the ground because it's at grade, which was part of the last approval as well. So the same shrubberies and trees, the counts, it stays the same. They just shifted a little bit there.
And there's no change to the egress from
There was a slight change up top here, which.
No, I'm sorry, I meant from the parking area, the driveway that connects from the parking area to the street. That's all the same, no changes there.
The only change we did is we made it internal. We made it easier for trash and loading. Whereas before we had a ramp that went around and basically came up the sidewalk and around. We now bury that inside of the building, so it's an internal ramp, not an external ramp.
That's much better.
It is. It is. And we can use the grade offset there and just do a ramp as opposed to having it come around. And that's what's witnessed by, I don't know where it is. There's a door somewhere that shows that. So those are the changes.
Okay. Any other questions about the application?
Do you show those trees on the elevation?
I don't. There's none shown here at all because I wanted to show what the elevation looks like. So you do see like a lower lying shrub that we're going to put in, but if you notice, with the exception of these two that are existing, we don't show anywhere. Just so you can, again, these are done here for context of height.
Okay. Did you bring this plan back to Shade Tree Commission too, or there's no?
They just literally they moved, and it was part of my last approval, and it was also, I'm sure, it'll be contingency here that we adhere to the Shade Tree Commission's rulings and I trust me, they're spec'd out on the plans, and Kevin's on. We followed it, we adhere to that in our revision submission again. We actually redid the landscaping plans as part of our full formal application, which adhered to Shade Tree Commission specifications.
Can I just, because you already.
We'll give the public a chance to try to do things in a certain order. It's okay. So, are there any other planning commissioner questions? Okay, so I received letters from the Montgomery County Planning Commission, Kevin Walsh and Eric Johnson, who didn't flag any concerns, claims, or anything you want to add to that?
No.
Okay, so now we'll take public comment.
I just have one quick question, but it's just the original footprint is the only place where the building will be, right? Where all that floods.
Yes. Just, I was looking when you guys were talking earlier to see where like your own formulation. Just going to show you something.
Mm-hmm.
So it actually, the aerial now has been updated to show since we took the building down. Okay. That concrete pad is where the building stood.
Okay.
You see that? And that was the yard. So if you look, here's the Rite Aid. Okay. Here's where the building stood.
Right.
And that was the yard.
Right.
That's the exact same footprint you have your Tyler.
The yard will have, the yard will have a building on it. Right?
Correct.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
the same footprint.
That's it.
Yeah. Okay. So,
Yeah.
it's the same footprint.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Any other questions?
No.
Okay. Jim, are there any questions online?
Well, let's see. Anybody want to say anything? Oh, that was Kevin. Yeah. Kevin, did you leave and came back?
Recording in progress.
My laptop's gonna go, so I have to go with my cell phone.
Oh, it sounds like Kevin's on twice or something. He doesn't know.
Sorry, my laptop died. I'm on my cell phone now.
Better.
Brought to you by Zoom.
Yeah.
Jim, we're still recording, right?
Yes, we are.
Okay. No other public comment?
We have 3 people in the public online. If anyone wants to say anything, they should
Raise your hand.
Right. I don't see any raised hands.
So we'll close public comment. Any final comments from planning commissioners? Would someone like to offer a resolution regarding the approval of the amended final plan for 650 Montgomery Avenue as presented?
I move we approve this change as presented.
All right. This amended final plan. Any second for that?
That's right.
Okay. James. All right, all in favor of recommending the council approval of the amended final plan for 60 Montgomery Avenue? Any opposed? Jen, do you vote aye or otherwise? Jen Sloan?
Yep.
I vote aye, but it's a very conservative aye because I caught the board was not in the in a camera. I heard most of the conversation, not all of it. I heard brick, but I think it's thin brick. It's okay.
I'm under conservative. Okay. All right. So Adam, thank you. Sounds like you have approval.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming by. Good luck.
Thanks. Yeah, it's our goal of like getting the ground by the end of Q1. Like,
What's Q1?
by the end of March,
okay.
March, April. Once the ground falls.
Okay.
Once the ground falls. Thank you.
That's okay. So we will move on to our next agenda item: zoning amendments for green buildings, apartments, and mixed-use buildings. All right. So,
I guess there's 4 elements there.
these are three different agenda items. They're related in a way, though. They're related in the sense that, as you know, our role as planning commission is to advise council. Council has asked for our advice on these topics, and they are interested in taking action on some of these topics, so they've asked us to provide advice. Most of these topics we've been working on for several months, so I hope all of you have spent a lot of time on the phone with me, trying to sort things out. So I hope we have proposals that are mostly satisfactory to most of you. So what I'd like to do is review them with you quickly, and then we can set about having a discussion with all of them. My goal is to come up with something that, if not all of us, most of us can agree with tonight. I think that in some cases we might have to agree on an idea, but there may be details that still need to be worked out. So I'm going to like to see how far we can get on an agreement that as many of us as possible can agree on. That's the goal. So let me start with green buildings. So the proposal that is circulated is changed in some very substantive ways from the proposal that we discussed last month at our meeting. The main differences are that rather than a bonus process, this is now an idea that will be filtered through a conditional use process. The philosophy of that is that in communication with folks, I got the sense that a bonus somehow felt like it was a trade. And that our position should be to make the recommendation we can, the best recommendation we can about what's appropriate. And if we would like to hold people to stronger standards, we don't do that through a trade, we do it through a conditional use. So that reflects that. It's a philosophical difference. I believe it takes us to the same point.
I don't understand what you mean by conditional use in this context. Sorry, what do you mean?
A conditional use is a discretionary approval process.
Yes.
Whereby certain uses, which is a broadly construed term, it could include densities or land uses or even urban design features, those can all be considered a use, are only permitted if an applicant meets certain requirements, which are published in the zoning code and requested by council. So
just understand, it's still, they would follow the green building standards.
Right.
They would apply for a conditional use.
Yes.
And then there would be some.
So that's what I will get to.
Okay.
So in part response to your question is rather than considering green building requirements as a bonus in certain circumstances, we would incorporate it into the standards of approval for all conditional uses of all sorts in the borough. And those are listed. There's a table on chart I sent you that lists those, but generally that is for conversions of historic civic institutional buildings, as we saw, with the Methodist Church, apartment buildings in 3A or 3C, 4A, 4B districts, mixed-use buildings on Windsor Avenue, and properties that include more than one principal building on a lot. Those are the general areas where we have conditional uses right now. So all those circumstances, green building standards would have to be applied. Today, we'll consider two other conditional uses, one for 3-story mixed-use buildings in the 5A district downtown, and apartment buildings in the 5B district on Montgomery Avenue. So those are the circumstances where it would apply at. So you would be allowed to do certain things if you followed those standards.
Can you just read the original list of conditional use? Just so I can write them down. Okay.
They were emailed to you, okay. So you can refer to what was emailed, and that will be more accurate. In addition, at the request of council, they'd like us to consider applying green building requirements to accessory dwelling units as well. So that's something else to consider. The second,
I'm sorry, but those would not be part of the conditional use process?
That's correct.
Okay, so it'll just be a new requirement for the
right, and I can explain that in a minute. So the two circumstances would be through zoning for conditional uses and accessory dwelling units. The second major change is that the requirements being requested for accessory dwelling units are different from what you saw last time. Last time you saw 3 columns, construction standards, energy efficiency, and carbon reduction in the operation of buildings. So based on comments we received and conversations that I've had with you, this proposal does not have any requirements related to carbon reduction in construction. Those have just been eliminated because after talking with you, I was persuaded that there's not enough gain from them to go through the process of having. It's not as good as they would be. To regulate those things would result in little gain for the effort we would have to make, and would be very dynamic and hard to manage. So that leaves us with energy efficiency, carbon reduction, and operation. And those are relatively the same. Energy efficiency, we would identify a standard which is above and beyond our current building code standards.
Can I interject just momentarily? There is in your...
Hang on 1 second.
I'm sorry.
Then I'll let you interject.
Okay.
As Heidi pointed out, the standard that I wrote in my notes is probably not the one we would use. So I don't know if
that's what I was going to say. The Pennsylvania State is IECC 22. And I think that's ASHRAE is just a component part of it.
So that will have to be changed. That may be something we need to settle on after this meeting. Carbon reduction and operation is the same. Nothing has changed there. So those would be the green building requirements that would be part of the conditional use. So those would be wrapped into all the other things that an applicant has to do to get a conditional use. This would not be the only thing. There would be many other requirements depending on the nature of the use. The third major change is that for other kinds of construction, like houses, twins, 1-story commercial buildings, we would seek people to follow green building requirements, but not through the zoning code, because it is impractical to use zoning for that purpose. And what we would propose there is that the borough give building permit fee reductions for people who are pursuing construction and following the signals, we get a building permit reduction. And this really follows the model that we initially saw in places like Doylestown and Swarthmore and other municipalities. We get building permit reductions for people who meet stricter green standards. So we get building permit thing, we would not have an involvement. Though this is not intrinsic, there's two other recommendations that have come from our conversations. One is that we stress to the borough leadership the importance of incentivizing green building improvements in the existing building stock, where and I think all of you agree there's much more to be gained, given that we have 1,000 buildings in town, and that the borough consider models like mini grants or low interest revolving loan funds to support people who are making green improvements to their houses. There'd be funding available to help people do that. And that finally, we recommend a special exception process to exempt green building improvements from dimensional requirements. That's not much changed from the last time we discussed it. Yeah, I think it's pretty much the same as the last time we discussed it. So that is a largely revamped set of recommendations based on the the guidance that you all gave when we had a conversation. I've also talked a little bit to other folks, the County Planning Commission and so forth. Jen, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
I would just add that, I guess following on the heels of the last meeting, this was all fast and furious on our desks. I think the real research started in July. The pencil to paper was in August. We had a meeting in September and then a follow-up meeting in October, and here we are in November. I think the progress is good. I completely sympathize with the position taken in defense of the existing form-based code. I understand that, and I just understand it. And I think that a lot of those items previously in what I'll call column, I think before it was column A, I've been calling it column A, the site-specific, more, architectural items, such as, reuse existing structure, use local materials. While all of those things are probably viable, there are other ways, I think, perhaps to achieve them, perhaps by, establishing new programming or, I have some ideas about it. I've mentioned them a couple of times. Now is not the time to revisit those ideas. But I think as a start that IECC and all of the items for carbon reduction, I think it's a good start.
I'd just like to add one other thing. I did discuss all these revisions with Council President Bush. He heard the meeting. I gave him feedback from the meeting that we had. I gave him a synopsis of the conversations we had, so he's aware of what the planning commissions were saying. And so he's aware too of how this has evolved and what is on the table. I think it's consistent with the objectives he believes council has. So I think one way or another, council's going to put something on its table at its meeting in November. So I think that's all I have to say. So I guess I could either continue on and talk about 5A and 5B, or we could pause now and have comments and conversation about how this has evolved. It's up to you guys, how you'd like to proceed.
seems to make sense to wrap this up and then move on, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's fine with me. Let's, if you don't mind, I'd like to hear from everyone before we have repeat comments. That might be good just to hear what everyone's thinking. We can start anywhere. I can call on people or just, if you feel ready to make a comment, go ahead and make a comment.
I think you've gotten it to a good point, Tom. I think the market is going to weigh in on some of these conditions. The relative costs that property owners will face in an all-electric environment will reveal themselves, and the world will react accordingly, and that's fine. That's the way the world turns. So let's try that. Let's see what happens. It'll turn out, for example, that electric hot water is going to lead to a lot of daily showers. And we'll see how the world reacts to that. And that's the acid test. So I'm very happy to set the bar high in terms of energy conservation and see how far we can get.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I think this has come an awful long way from when we saw it last. And, I think I can say that I am generally supportive of all the directions that have been taken. I think it's, as Jim just said, I think it's moving in the right direction, and I support it.
Did you talk about the green building improvements, the infrastructure in side and setbacks and whatnot? Did you talk about that? Because that's the only kind of gray area right now is what that means.
So I didn't say much about that, but you asked some questions about that.
Yeah.
So you go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to know if we could be a little more specific about what those items might be. And because you didn't list them, and I know we talked a little bit about solar panels, EV charging stations, and I don't know if there's much of a presence of a geothermal supply because it's all underground. But
unless there's like something that has to go on top.
On top, which I'm not aware of. But I think maybe just if that's going to be included in this. I don't think we have very much information right now about what that means.
So let's talk about that for a minute. I wanted that to come up with our conversation tonight. So your question.
Yeah.
So a little more what Heidi's brought up is the topic of a special exception for dimensional relief for green building. It's not intrinsic to the other things we're talking about, but could be related. This is a provision I'm proposing to avoid a situation where somebody who wants to do the green building improvements, add in renewable energy infrastructure, runs into a conflict with the code dimension. I think we all know that's likely to happen if it happens at all with solar panels, things like that. So this is meant to say, so the question is, how do we manage that, right? And you've all made cases in the past that, the form of the buildings is very thought out, and we want to be really careful about that. On the other hand, it's possible that there may be additions to buildings related to green infrastructure. We might not even be able to anticipate them yet. That might run into conflict with the code. So, do we want to ignore that and see what happens? That's one option. Wait until we get a conflict and see how to deal with it. Do we want to try to develop detailed guidelines, which, as you know, at the pace we work, it could take a long time. It could be kind of a fruitless effort because the technology will change faster than we can do guidelines. I swear to God, I've seen like a 60-page zoning code just about solar panels. I can show it to you on my computer, and I don't think any one of us wants to do this? Or do we just find a way to say, look, most of the things people are going to do are probably okay. Let's let the zoning hearing board deal with it, which is the least difficult path of getting a reviewed approval, and set conditions. And the condition is it has to be the minimum relief necessary. So you can't just say, I want to do this for my convenience. It has to be, you have to demonstrate there's no other way to do it more simply. It doesn't occur in the frontage area between the front of the house and the street. That's one place we wouldn't allow these, that you couldn't put a hot water tank in your front yard or a heat pump or what have you. It would have to be inside your back. The relief sought will not have an adverse impact on adjacent property owners. That would be on the adjacent property owners to demonstrate that there's an impact, and that the relief is reversible. And that if the property will be brought back into compliance if the solar panels, the heat pump, the whatever it is banned, that they have to then return the building back to. So it's not necessarily a permanent change. It's one that we remove if we're not using it. So that's the special exception. Heidi's question is, so what would that apply to? Do we need to specify that? And that's a really great question to talk about. If this is worth talking about at all, because we know solar is probably where we would see the most applications for this. Maybe things like heat pumps or tanks or encasements for geothermal things. But there are also maybe things that we don't know of yet.
Like my hydrogen concentrator. Where am I going to put that?
Well, you're not going to put it in your front yard, Mr. Portwell.
How about your window?
So,
okay.
So the question is, how do we balance flexibility for people to do these things without having an onerous administrative process and without getting so specific that we're constantly rewriting the code because the infrastructure is changing? Have we landed? Does it need to be tweaked? Are there other things that we have to imagine? And I would think that it would be fairly possible tonight to say, I mean, this is not the first time we've talked about this, so it'd be fairly possible to say tonight, either you're interested in this or you're not. And if you're interested in it, here's what, if anything, you think needs to happen for it to be fixed. I'd like to get to that point. So maybe we can take a straw poll. Who's interested in even moving this forward? Yep. Okay, so we're all interested in moving it forward. So my question then is, there's two. One is, what would this potentially apply to? And then secondly, is there anything that needs to be done to tweak it to make it more acceptable, workable, consistent to you with what we're envisioning?
Well, is special exception something that's just granted?
It's a special exception is granted if the person who's making the application can meet certain requirements. And that's what's, and it's a public hearing at the zoning hearing.
Oh, it is, okay. So can they be exempt from the fee for that?
Yes, and that's a good note. That's been discussed.
The fee.
Yeah, that we've already discussed that.
Because I think as long as it's reviewed by somebody and there's no fee, that's a great way.
So yeah, that has been discussed, and I think the borough staff's already agreed to that. So that should be added into what I wrote. Sorry. Son wants to know if he's going to get a ride home. What do you think the answer is to that? No. He works at Giant, so I'm sorry.
Heidi, can you repeat your question? You said, would they be exempt from what? A fee? Did you say a fee?
Application fee.
An application.
Okay. Yeah.
So like if they have to apply to the zoning hearing board for a meeting and it costs $100, the borough would need that. So and you know what the challenge for them would be to say, like, I have the solar panel, I want to put it up like this, and someone might say, well, like, what happens if you put it like that? That's not, it's closer to the roof line.
Yeah, I think it just needs a review, and the best thing about the review is that if multiple of these come in, like, over time, the same zoning hearing board kind of have a sense of where this is headed.
Yeah, and it would always be reviewed by the building officer.
Yeah.
That's what,
We're going to have to establish what adverse impact on the streetscape and the look and feel, which is where we all came into this thing eons ago. This zoning, revisiting the zone, is managing the adverse impacts of life as it goes forward. And I can see that some of the technologies that are likely to evolve, solar panels being the obvious poster child for this, could be really injurious to that which we hold dear. And we need to have a way to manage the degree of adversity that we're willing to contemplate. It's easy for me to say that. Sitting here tonight, I don't know how to implement that.
It seems to me it'd be a rare instance where someone would actually be encroaching into an area that's not allowed currently. I mean, you're allowed to have solar panels on your roof right now. They're flat. How many people are going to want to put them in their side yard?
Yeah. As long as they're not in the front yard, right?
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine that's going to be very.
Well, also, there are a lot of people who want to, understandably, want to optimize the angle of incidence of the solar, of the insulation. And that can look like hell if we're not careful. I've seen it. And we have to be careful.
I mean, I would make the argument that technology, as we go forward, will probably become more discreet. I think it will become more woven into the fabric of everything else we have, like our, iPhone watches that are very discreet and perform the same function as our phone and our computer. I don't see how it's going to become an eyesore, especially since, it will be one up above, the sight line will be beyond the roof line at the roof. And then secondly, if it's geothermal or something like that, or some partial array or whatever, it will be in the backyard, is one part of it. The other part of it is I think that Narberth is going to be, I attended the meeting, we're going to be the first borough in the state to do community choice aggregation. If we can get everybody on that renewable energy, I think the chance of more individual infrastructure will yield to the collective infrastructure that we'll have in place through a third-party supplier of renewable energy. So I think those are two really, I don't think we want to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. I think that all of these things are working together at a time when it's about to take off. I think in January, you're going to see a lot of people looking into getting their individual infrastructure because of the rebates that will be available through the Inflation Reduction Act. But if we can get this, community potentially by next October, if we can have that up and running, the community choice aggregation, I mean, that's going to be a big deal.
I hear you, Jen.
I want to make sure we hear from everyone else.
Yeah, but I was interrupted, so I'm resuming my line.
Oh.
I hope you're right. In the meantime, I want to maintain control. Yes. Okay, because you might not be right. And when the dust settles, I want the borough to have to be holding the reins. Okay, not somebody selling a magical solar panel system, or, as I quipped a minute ago, hydrogen concentrator. That is the answer to all our ills. I want us to be in control of what we see on our streets. End of rant.
Wait, I'm sorry. I made a mistake. I want to make sure everyone gets to speak before we.
So, with regard to solar panels, I think
just in general, though, the question on the table is how do we balance sort of, I want to make sure we stay focused on the question. The question is, everyone agrees we should try to do this. how do we balance, sort of not being able to kind of micromanage every decision versus potentially impacts that we don't want to see?
So if all of this is being filtered through conditional use, will there be?
No, it's special exception, which goes to the zoning hearing board.
But I think we're just talking about this green infrastructure, page 2 of that, not the whole thing. Is that right?
Yes,
Just page 2.
Yep, it's, look at it.
We'll go back to the bigger in a minute. Heidi raised a question about green infrastructure. Let's talk about that.
So we're just talking about 608 green infrastructure special exception. Can we go to Adam while I look at it?
Right, so we're just talking about the relief from dimensional requirements.
Well, that's the question.
Right, and it will go before the zoning hearing. I think the key point here is that I realize that adverse impact is not defined, but I don't think we can think through all of those issues. So it seems this is discretionary then, right? The relief.
It is, but the special exception, it tends to be given if these conditions can be met.
Well, it's reversible, right? It's not a permanent structure. It's not supposed to have an adverse impact on adjacent property owners. It's not in the frontage area. It is the minimum necessary to accomplish the green building infrastructure. I mean, these all seem very reasonable to me. I realize there's some degree of risk, but I think it's probably a manageable risk at this point.
The zoning hearing board doesn't have much discretion. They are charged with enforcing the rules as written.
All right, can I just ask then, so if this is about dimensional relief that's going to be more or less automatic, rezoning hearing board, this is going to give up some of our ability to request that a property, that they consider moving their building to one end of the property or something like that, or sorry?
No, it's not. It's just about whether you want to add something to your house that's related to green infrastructure.
Yeah, just to be clear, there are 4 criteria that have to be met. It's not just a total blank check here.
I think that there needs to be some kind of a definition of green building infrastructure to get to one, what I think was Heidi's point.
Right.
Like term needs to be defined. If you're going to say related to the incorporation of green building infrastructure, we need to have some kind of a definition, whether it's general or specific.
Right. So that's something you can address.
Yeah.
So this does not cover things like additions or.
No, it's solely for green building infrastructure. It does. So it can't, for example, create additional space. Although you could create additional space, you just couldn't get a special exception for it. Like if you want to build additional space that's compliant with the code, you can do it. If you put solar panels on it, you can do it. There's nothing to stop you.
Wait, I'm sorry. I can't keep.
So what I'm saying is the relief would only be given for the infrastructure if there was a dimensional problem. It would not be given for anything else. Only that's what A is. It's solely related to the implementation of the infrastructure.
So, but is this? I mean, it seems to be like to the point about risk. But if somebody puts up says, I 50-foot solar collector is my green energy of choice, and that's exceeds the dimensional height limit.
The question is that the minimum that you need to do?
How does the zoning board determine that?
Well, they may ask an expert like our building code official. Is that the minimum? And also people can come give testimony. So, if someone wants to come and say.
Trusting in professionals and democracy.
But that's, in a way.
Democracy.
And professionals.
The thing is that the only other option is to actually say what it is and write the rules. And I'm suspicious of that because things will change and I'm not sure we can spend all of our time writing rules.
So if I wanted a solar collector on the top of my house that was, say, bigger than my roof, could I build a superstructure over my roof? Or like a double size solar collector?
If that is the minimum necessary to,
But by definition, it's not a minimum. Say I personally want to double my solar capacity in my house. So instead of following the existing roof,
What you're arguing here was the minimum necessary to power the house.
That's a lot.
Purpose.
Yeah, you're not
Building.
going to power your house into the current technology
Yeah.
with a rooftop solar.
That's why you need the
Not
massive
here.
array.
I mean,
what's
yeah, I
that?
just got back from New Mexico, maybe in New Mexico, not here.
Depends what you're doing in your
I
house.
don't know, over
You're
the
like,
course of a year, we pay zero. We make all our own solar. with
Yeah,
our
but
13 panels.
I think effectively what we're talking about now is exactly this issue, is the installation of solar collectors on roofs. And are we willing to allow somebody to do other than what we see now, which is to have it on the existing roof plane within the dimensions of the existing roof? And personally, I think that, if we want to have some kind of control over the form of the town, that we open up a huge Pandora's box by allowing anything other than what we're seeing now.
Flat panels.
And flat panels, yeah. And I happen to agree with Jennifer, what said earlier. I think what we have now, and I've said this before, is a transitional technology, and it's a real good shot that in 10 years, the whole industry is going to be different. Yeah. But meanwhile, a bad installation now is something we've been looking at for 20 years.
but it's also going to be somewhat temporary too. It's not
one man's temporary is another man's here an awful long time. Yeah.
When you get to be as old as Dave.
Yeah, that's right.
Everything's permanent.
I'm running out of time.
So folks, I understand this place. So the question is, can you imagine like the criteria you would place to prevent that from happening?
Yeah, I just said it.
Which is not having this.
Mm-hmm.
Which is just sticking with the rules we have now and not having this. Or else I missed it. What did you say?
No, I would say if we're talking specifically about solar collectors, that they be flat up against the roof, that they not exceed the boundaries of the existing roof plane, and we call it a day. And
Isn't that
that's
what's in our code now?
pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
Unless you have a flat roof, you can't put a solar collector on a flat roof.
Why can't you put it on a flat roof?
Well, they would stick up. They would be on a.
No, you can put them flat.
They put a flat.
But they're not ideal flat.
No.
They're not ideal facing north either. But
Yeah, they're not.
you can still
I
install
mean, none. I
This
suspect
is
that.
to allow people to do that, though. That's what this.
Well, to run with the flat roof thing, because that's a pretty good example. Like, who cares if you put tilted panel flat roof? Really? I mean, is that something we're really worried about? I think
That's what this is. Just
yeah, but I'm saying like architecturally, as a practical matter, does it matter? It doesn't matter. Flat roof. Like, first of all, you're barely.
to you, but maybe.
Well, let me finish. How have you even seen these things on a flat roof? I mean, that's a good point. Like, we're not even, does the zoning code even go with flat roofs? I have to check that for houses and things. But I mean, if you have a commercial building and you put tilt panels on the
I think all this is saying is that go to the zoning hearing board. If a body of people who are making decisions decide that it's okay, then it should be okay. But it just gives someone a second look at it. And I agree with you, Adam. It's not a big deal, but other people might feel differently as human data.
I know that people rip out their shrubs and it may look worse, but that's yeah.
Can I offer? So I think the Penn Valley Pub, which is not in Narberth, they have a flat roof. I believe they have elevated solar collectors on their flat roof. You seen that?
What is this?
No,
Penn Valley Pub.
Yeah.
You can't see it. You can't see it.
Is that an offensive setup they have there?
If that was in Narberth and I had a building owner propose that, I would say it's objectionable.
Really?
Yeah. And I love that place. We're there almost every week.
You can't see it from the inside.
But you can see it from the street. That to me is is the kicker. If you have a flat roof installation and you can't see it from the street, then I don't really care. But if you can see it from the public way, that's a problem. And you can see those from the public way.
Well, I mean, I gotta tell you, like, so we were down Elm earlier. The thing I feel like we missed an opportunity as a town is like, why am I still looking at all these stupid power lines when they've just spent $1 gajillion on the street, right? Visual blight is, I mean, solar panels on a flat roof, like, we're surrounded by these cables everywhere, right? There's a lot of visual blight out there. I mean, I'm with you. I want the town to look nice, but I'm not sure that, I think the point is the cure worse than disease, right? You can't design through his own, like this kind of stuff through his own. So if you want to do an experiment, you got to get
I think you can, and we have. I think we have a reasonable criteria, and the zoning code and zoning codes in general have consistently for many years talked about changes not being seen or objectionable from the public way. And I don't think I'm way out there in terms of zoning philosophy by sticking to that.
Well, I want the town to be charming too, but I'm serious. 150 years ago, there were no power lines.
But
power lines are ugly.
Don't get me started about power lines.
Yeah,
I've ranted before about needing to bury power lines.
We should bury them, but if we haven't, and they power the town, and right, we live with it. I mean, it's necessary infrastructure. I would support burying them.
I'm going to, I think we kind of gotten to a point where we all know what the issues are. So what I'd like to do is make a suggestion that we vote on this. And what I'd like to do is amend this by listing out, in response to your question, by the solar panels, geothermal infrastructure, heat pumps. What else did we mention? There's one other. Is there anything else we mentioned as potential infrastructure? EV chargers. EV charging systems. And that, so I'd like to add that to this. And is there anything else, Chloe, that comes up ever?
Well, your current zoning ordinance mentions solar water heating equipment on the exterior of the building. I actually haven't encountered that, but maybe that's something worth mentioning also. So the high efficiency boilers tend to vent out the side of the house rather than out the chimney, so maybe homes are to.
Solar water heaters are just solar panels with water circulating through them instead of, being direct conversion to electricity. That's all that is.
Is that listed that you just read written down somewhere?
No, I don't think so. So, solar panels, heat pumps, EV charging, geothermal infrastructure. And what was the last thing?
Solar water heaters.
Solar water heaters.
Do you want to mention wind? Small wind.
Wind, yeah, windmill.
Are we going to allow wind turbines? Are they allowed now? That's good.
Domestic wind turbines, not industrial wind turbines.
Well, yeah, see how those
I don't think we have a problem with
what, windmills?
No, we'll put one of those.
I don't think we have enough wind to make a windmill an economically viable alternative. There was a lot of hot air in Northern, so I don't think we have that problem.
And then, so what I'd like to do is amend it that way and ask for a vote. And then also say because we can't spend, this is a small part of many things. We don't spend all night on this. If there's anyone who's uncomfortable with this, we can continue to seek a way to modify this so that there's some brakes on it before it actually comes back. But we'll need help in figuring out what that is.
And you're going to just indicate that that'll go in front of the zoning hearing board.
What we go.
Are you going to put that in there too? I mean, just special exception, is that clear enough?
Well, that automatically goes.
Okay, so we don't need to spell it out.
No.
Okay.
So I guess that's what I'd like to propose. An amendment listing those items. I vote with not only the vote to see who supports this provision, but also acknowledging that we should continue to seek some other criteria that can mitigate what's potentially the worst impacts, but we'll have to keep working.
At the minimum, if you're going to use the zoning hearing board, there has to be objective criteria. Because they're not allowed to make decisions based on whim.
Right.
So we can do that.
Okay.
Because but they can't.
Right.
So we have
We
to
can't do it
nail
right
down,
now. It's what
we have to
we have to do.
nail down the parameters if the zoning hearing board is going to.
So we'll have to do that between now and when. Okay, so let me call for a vote on this so we can move on. There's much more to cover. So
Someone should read what we're voting on, like what's it?
Just on 608.
we're voting to recommend 500-608 with the list of infrastructure that I already described, and the not part of the actual code, but the agreement that will continue to seek another criteria that will help provide objective standards. I don't know how to put it, but to mitigate against, proposals that are, but how do we say?
Keep talking.
That are satisfactory, meet the
To make sure.
Constrain the limits of this in some way. Constrain
Yes, to provide.
the extent of this.
To restrict egregious green intent.
Whoa. Egregious green intent.
But that's,
Egregious green intent.
I was just saying, we'll continue to work on more objective criteria for approval. How about that?
Yeah, that's good.
And we know what that means. Okay. All in favor? Aye. Okay, thank you. Let's go back to the overall green zoning. The other aspects of this. So Dave and Heidi and Jim made brief comments. Do either of you have overall comments about the overall green, green zoning, green building recommendations?
So now we're talking about the overall
package.
Green building that gets filtered through conditional use.
Yeah.
Okay, so at that time that projects get filtered through conditional use, can there be other conditions added?
Yes, that's what conditions it's for.
It's all, okay, so we're not clipping conditional use only to green building.
No, that's the whole point, which is green building would come up in the context of many other aspects of a conditional. So for example, if you want to develop multiple buildings on a lot, there's like 12 conditions you have to meet in order to do that. This would just be added into that.
What about,
just be added in?
Just danger of being too specific. What if the incentive they were receiving was like a third floor? Can part of that condition be where that third floor occurs, like it's like a step back from street view, or or do they, once they're awarded a third floor, is that just automatic and untouchable?
Anything that's granted through a conditional use, you can create conditions specific to that situation.
We're not discussing any development bonuses tonight, right?
We're not going to discuss development bonuses at all, but we will discuss new conditional uses for 5A and 5B.
Right, but we're not discussing that yet then.
No, we're not. No.
Well,
we have to focus to, so for example, in the Windsor Avenue zone, you can build apartment buildings and mixed use by conditional use, but one of the conditions is they have to set back. The top floor has to set back. Yes, so yes, you can do that. And there are other conditions too, like that talk about what street a building confront and how. I think one of the ones in Windsor Avenue can only be 100 feet long or something like that. So you can anything that's objective, you can conceivably add in.
Well, yeah, you're talking about things that are written into the ordinance. I think Jim is asking about during the process, can council say, okay, we'll grant you this conditional use, but you also have to do this. Is that what you're asking?
It would be nice, yeah,
that they can do that.
But the trick with conditional use is that it gets memorialized somewhere. There were all sorts of conditional uses that we talked about with the Methodist Church when it was converted to apartments that somehow just never made it into the written record and never made it into construction. But there were things that we discussed with them that they agreed to. The trick is to make sure it all gets recorded.
Yeah, but Jim, to answer your question, yes, council can ask for other conditions. Those are negotiations. If they're in the code ahead of time, then they have to be followed. If they're added on, they're negotiated.
And planning commission has a role in this as well.
Yeah. But that's right.
They can negotiate additional requirements.
Yes. Which is actually what we do now.
Can they waive away the minimum requirements?
Playing the
Council.
I think they can. I think if they want to waive a requirement that they can. No, they can't do that.
Not in the zoning.
No.
They can waive other requirements.
So these green building requirements could not be waived.
That's correct.
That's correct.
Will there exist any other conditional use that does not involve green building? Or is what we're talking about is all conditional uses now going to have a base level of green building?
That's the proposal here because,
okay.
So Jim, the way, just so you know, the way the code is written, there's a general chapter on conditional uses that lays out the process, right? And it lays out the general condition that everyone has to meet. This would be there. So anytime anyone has conditional use for anything, it would be there. Now, certain kinds of conditional uses, like apartment buildings on Windsor Avenue, they have their additional conditions specific to that, right? If any of these on this list that I passed out, they have their own specific conditions that are in that part of the code, in addition to all the ones that all conditional uses have to meet. So this recommendation is that the green building requirements go in all conditional uses, no matter what it's for. Okay. That's the recommendation.
How do you, so some of the conditional uses apply to the conversion of existing buildings.
Yeah.
The use of historic buildings. The way that's written says no hookups for fossil fuels. Is the intention to be no new hookups or no additional hookups? Or are you intending to require that a historic civic building, in order to take advantage of the additional uses, would have to remove all hookups to natural gas, oil, electricity? Maybe not.
Okay, so Chloe's pointed out, there are a couple situations, I think there's at least two. One is we allow civic institutional buildings like old churches to be converted to some other use so that they don't have to be torn down. They can be used for some other use. That's a conditional use. So let's think Methodist Church. Chloe is asking, for the Methodist Church, would you have required them, if you're looking at that now, would you require them to go all electric as part of their conditional use? That's your question. This also appears in the 4B district, which is right around downtown. 4A, 4B, look, it's the one right around downtown, 4A, right? Like Windsor Avenue, Dudley, Hampton, Grayling, a little collar around downtown. And we have a provision that allows for some of the older houses to be used for like professional offices or lawyers' offices or dentist offices, because we didn't want people to tear those houses down. We wanted to keep the house, even if it meant they had to be used for like an accountant or something like that. And so that's another one. Those, I think, are the two situations. So the question there would be, so would Chloe's got a good workaround if we could say no new hookups, which means but for old buildings, you could still have a hookup.
Yeah.
In the case of the Methodist Church, for example, I'm imagining back 5 or 6 years ago, whenever it was 10, that in order to make it all electric energy in that building, the insulation alone that would have been required would have killed the project. So it would be a very impractical requirement for that building to have been forced to be all electric.
Jim, they would still need to meet our energy conservation codes, right?
Well,
That was gonna be the second part of my question.
Well, existing buildings.
it's tough.
Lighter.
It would be really hard to meet current modern energy conservation standards in an old stone building.
Well, except if they're building under the IBC existing building code, they would have to meet whatever's in that code.
Which is minimal.
Well, but
It understands
But
that
it-
there's only so much you can do.
but it's code mandated.
Yeah.
And I think this speaks to
Yeah.
whether we upgrade to the more current version of the
Yeah.
IBC.
It's a complicated question. Suffice it to say, it's a complicated question.
So Jen,
I would like more information on this. I'd like more, I haven't had to think about building systems in a long time, but I'd like to understand how feasible is it to convert from natural gas to electric heat in a historic property that's currently on natural gas?
We could get some input from somebody that knows the answer to that question, which none of us do.
Because I don't want to dismiss it and say it's impossible. I want to know.
Yeah.
Yeah. But,
Oh, it's not impossible. It's just not practical.
well, I want to hear more because that's we were talking about. I don't hear this.
No, I think that makes sense. And if you have this conversion of civic and institutional buildings in your code because you want it to happen, you just want to be careful what you're requiring, make sure that it's still feasible.
I'm going to throw out there that you're this cold, dark place where energy is extremely expensive right now, right? And I suspect that we just could be a lot more efficient here, even with our existing building stock, than we choose to be. But I'd like the technical education on that.
Mhm.
so that's a very small question, but those are two conditional uses that we need to evaluate.
What are you doing? You should be in bed. It's time.
I agree.
Okay,
Meeting adjourned.
really let it,
We should all.
let us say that is a small part of this that we will evaluate further before deciding. So I would say our default would be not to include these buildings unless we were able to satisfy ourselves that it's feasible. Is that fair?
Not to require it unless we don't think it's a tremendously onerous burden.
Yeah, our default would be not to include these conditions, so we'll have to fix that in the code writing. But if we find out it doesn't seem to be that onerous, then we can add it back in.
You can add it back in when?
Before we write the code, yeah. But for now, our default will be to research it more, but not include it unless we have evidence that it's okay. Okay, other comments from this side? I don't know, did you read that? Can I slowly raise that? Any other, do either of you have any other comments about this overall?
What overall? This page?
No, the green building requirement.
Pages 1, 3, 4, 5, and 6.
Not hearing any out-channel comment Heidi made to me today, which is that it may be harder than it sounds to apply this to ADUs in terms of you felt different standards needed to be applied.
Well, we talked about it not being the ASHRAE standards.
Right, so Jen and I talked about that, and we thought, it sounds to me like we need to look into it more, but it might be whatever the current, we don't have in our code, the current, was it IECC?
Yeah.
Let one short of that. So
We have 2018.
right,
Yeah.
they have 2021.
Yeah.
They
funny
do it every 3 years.
Yeah.
So we would just say 2021
Yeah.
instead of 2018, just
Yeah.
whatever. And Jen actually looked at it today to see if the changes were significant in this regard, and she thought they were. So
They were.
she thought they were. Yeah. Okay. So
Well, significant enough, and this was at a glance. I didn't do a deep dive here, but significant enough, the insulation requirements, I thought, as long as there is something that has changed that is of any consequence to what we're requesting, then it's okay to say 2021. But if there's nothing in 2021 that's that different from 2018 or at all different, then pertinent to what we're proposing here. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, there should be something there of substance that makes it effective to say 2025.
Your sense was that there were, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so.
Done.
Okay.
Any other comments or questions or things we feel we need to work through a little more?
Okay,
I just want to be mindful of time too. So focus on
These are probably just clarifying questions, I think. Okay, on page 4, down at the bottom, the proposed mixed-use buildings that are 3 stories in 5A, which is the downtown.
We're going to talk about that in a minute. That's the next topic on the agenda.
Not there yet. Okay.
See on the agenda, Jim? It's listed as the next topic. A, B, C. We're on A still. So we'll get to B and C as soon as we finish this.
I have one other item that and I'm sitting here thinking about charging stations. And I'm not sure how this comes into it, but right now it seems like we're in kind of the Wild West with it. You see, occasionally you see, cords sort of taped down to the sidewalk. You see,
There's one at my house right now.
there's a couple of charging stations that have been installed on Essex. And I'm wondering how we get ahead of this in anticipation that there are going to be a whole lot more in the coming years. I mean, I'm sort of assuming that our next car will be electric. I think many people are doing that. And then I'm thinking, okay, how do we deal with the charging of it? And we need to address that because it could have a real significant impact on the street furniture. And
so there's a couple of issues here. One is people running plugs from their house to the street. That's not a zoning issue. That's a property management issue.
That's what?
It's a property management issue.
Is that a regulatory issue?
It's there's a property management code that talks about things like.
I think it's a zoning issue. It goes into the public way.
Property management is about how you run your property. It's like.
And I'm saying it's not on your property. It's in the public way.
There's nothing being built in the right of way.
It's just a cord. Yeah.
Yeah, and when somebody.
I don't think that's a zoning issue.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. So that's one.
Something.
It's a property management issue. You're running a cable from your house to the street. You shouldn't be allowed to do that.
Okay, I guess we have a fundamental
No,
disagreement.
I don't think so.
About that.
Because those
That's
are dangerous. You run over.
It's not dangerous. I'm saying it's not a zoning issue. It's an issue of other code enforcement.
It's not built in.
How could infringement on the public way be not a zoning issue?
Because zoning is how you build. It's means to regulate the construction on private property. That's what it's for. It's not to regulate what you do on a street.
Okay, so we have like fundamentally different views on this.
It's not. I mean, the municipalities have codes about getting permits to do things in the public way. That's not zoning. If you want to run,
You're right.
If you want to run a cable in the public way, you want to have a block party, you want to put a bouncy thing out there for your kid's birthday party, if you want to, that's property management or right of way easement. That's not zoning. And so I don't. Okay, I agree it's a problem, but it's not a zoning problem. The second issue is the borough is thinking about strategies for putting EV parking along the streets, not just in downtown, but in neighborhoods. That is not a zoning issue either, but it's certainly a design issue. I don't know. I doubt it's a salvo issue because it's not subdivision and land development, but it's something. I don't know what it is, but it's not us. And then third is if a private property owner wants to put an EV EV charger. Basically what we've said already in the previous conversation is you can't put it in your front yard. You can't have any obstructions in your front yard. That the special exception wouldn't apply to that, and you're not allowed to put anything in your front yard now. So I guess the question would be if someone has a corner lot, they do it in their side yard. What you do on your property would be regulated by zoning. And so if people want to put EV parking, like a little stanchion in their yard, that would be a zoning issue. I think what we would probably suggest here is you just incorporate it. I mean, really what we should say is provide EV charging infrastructure in your house, like just the power feed, and then you can plug it in your garage, plug it in your driveway, plug it in your home. So, I mean, I think when it comes to what people do with their property and how they provide EV charger on their property, yes, that could be some more south.
Well, how do we weigh in? I mean, my greater concern is how are we all going to feel when these things are marching down Haverford Avenue and Windsor Avenue and Essex Avenue, one after another? You know, how do we weigh in on the discussion with council?
I don't know, but that's not, if they're being put in by the borough, that's not tonight's discussion. And I want to go home tonight and finish up our work tonight. Okay, sorry. I mean, if you want to ask me personally, I feel proud. I feel proud, quite frankly. But it's not a conversation that we have anything to do with. So we need to stay on track because we have two more big topics and we need to get through there. So are there any other comments about the green building recommendation?
So make sure we're on the right, which part of the thing are we discussing?
Anything in the 5 or 6 pages about green building recommendations? The 5 points here, the green building requirements.
Not page 4 yet.
What's that?
Yeah.
Not page 4?
No, I think we're up to page 4 also. Well, the last 2 items they come from the next agenda item. That's what he was saying.
Oh, so.
Like there's a whole different several page memo about those 2 items that we're going to discuss.
All right. Okay.
But they would then, if they get approved, would be incorporated here.
Right. Yeah, that's just so you know that when we talk about these issues. So is there anything else about the green building recommendations that, okay. So I guess what I want to ask is to see if we can craft a vote for these and to find out if there's any kind of condition you want to place on the vote. We have one condition, which is we need to look more into how these requirements might relate to the conversion of historic buildings to other uses. We're not satisfied yet, but we know nothing about that. I think that's one condition we need to look at. There are other, I guess what I'd like to do is ask for someone to make a motion about these, and then we can note anything that we feel is unfinished that we need to finalize.
I have a comment that's actually from Jim the other day, this Jim, which is that these all say provide electric vehicle charging as required by code. The proposed code amendment says that you calculate whatever your parking requirement is before any reductions are taken as in for, where it's allowed for on-street parking or whatever. And then 10% of that number of spaces you have to provide as EV charging spaces.
Right.
That isn't adopted yet, but that's what's proposed.
Right.
And Jim was saying, how can we future-proof this? Because there's going to be probably a lot more than 10% electric vehicles, in the future, and we need to get ahead of that. And maybe this green building requirements would be an opportunity to require a little more than would otherwise be required by code, if that's something that you as a body are interested in.
So you're saying the Saldo is going to require what, 10%?
10%.
Your question is, should we make it tougher?
Right. If for the conditional use.
Okay, fair question.
Yeah, which is really something that Jim brought up, but since he didn't say it
How do you feel about
Seems
it?
like,
that it's only to me the other day.
it seems like the need for charging could quickly outstrip 10%.
Yeah.
So do you guys feel that should be a stricter requirement?
I guess the alternative is to let, the developer see the need and provide it, I guess, but,
No, I'm just asking, do you think the requirement should be stricter? Sounds like you do. Why not?
Yeah.
Okay.
We really think this is happening, that electric cars are going to be a significant part of the fleet. There's no choice, really.
So
We should aim higher.
Okay, so just
I mean, this whole subject is
20%.
aimed at the future, right?
You know, have you ever seen, like, sometimes a charger like a Walmart will be positioned to be able to service like 4 or 6 spots? You know, it seems like something like that ought to be able to, you know.
You don't need to invent the infrastructure. I'm just looking for a target here. It's going to be more than what we have, which is 10%. What sounds right? 20, 30,
25?
25.
Can we base it on the market?
No, because I mean.
Currently, 4% of all new car sales are electric vehicles.
I mean, similarly, all
I know, that's the thing, then they'll be 100%.
Say 40?
4% of new car sales from, I think, from 2020 were electric vehicles.
Yeah, but that's not relevant to what's going to happen.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying that. That's why I'm saying you don't want to base it on the data from 2 years ago that we have. You know, you want to base it on something forward thinking.
Right.
And also Narberth relevant. I think the percentage purchased by Narberth residents is going to be higher than the national average.
Okay, so let me break this down to 2 things. One is, when you're doing EV charging, you need to provide the electrical feed and you need to provide the infrastructure, right? Those are actually 2 different things. So you have to build in the circuits, pull from the, whatever it is, the trunk lines. That part, the pulling from the trunk lines and building the circuits is the hard part, right? Because if you don't do that, when you do your building first, going back and retrofitting your electrical, right, that's pricey. You could add, if you have the power in your building, you can add the EV infrastructure relatively easily. So it feels to me like the real target is highly aspirational with, you know, providing enough power to support half of your parking units, right? And then you can add in the number of spots as whatever rate you want, right?
Well, it's expensive fast for the builder.
So what's a good target? But you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
No, the infrastructure, I mean, sorry, but what, just providing the power is not a big deal.
Well, it's a service upgrade.
Yeah, but it's not.
But when you're planning.
Oh, that's big money.
But when you're planning, my experience is when you're in the initial planning of the project, to have an incremental upgrade of a power service, the upgrade to the next step is not necessarily a huge number. It's a big number initially, but the bottom line is to quote Adam, we don't know what we're talking about. If we're going to really go down this road, we need some more professional
We know what we're
advice.
talking about. We just can't back it up with facts.
To be in politics.
If you're talking about a large surface parking lot, that's different than if you're talking about some sort of structure like a garage where there's already going to be stuff in the walls.
Yeah.
So
would you rather just simply set a higher target, like 25% for now? We can, this is not a hard, so this is not, I mean, this has to be changed if it's in the zoning code, but it's not as hard as changing other values, just changing this. Okay, so we'll change that.
That's a good number.
Okay, that was Jim's question. Any other questions? Please? Okay, so I guess what I'd like to do is ask someone if you'd like to make a resolution that you think captures our consensus and notes the things we still need to fix. Looking for a resolution. I can make a resolution. My resolution will be that we recommend that the council prepare code to implement the green building recommendations here as recommended in 1, 2, and 3 on this list, and that we continue to look at whether or not the conversion of historic buildings should be included in this process. Furthermore, we recommend to council that they concurrently consider item 4. And we've already recommended item 5. That's my, my resolution is that we recommend the council to develop code to implement recommendations 1, 2, and 3 of the green building recommendations, while we continue to consider whether or not they should apply to the convergence of the street. So that part's not what we consider. And furthermore, we also recommend that council concurrently begin to explore implementing recommendation 4, which is to provide financial incentives for green improvements to existing buildings.
Okay.
That's the recommendation. I think that encapsulates what we're talking about.
Recommend the council develop a code to implement green building recommendations while we continue.
1, 2, and 3 on this list.
Which list are you pointing at?
Green building recommendations.
Which is the conditional uses, the ADUs, and table 4 building permit fee renewal. Those are the 3 items you're recommending. Okay. While we continue to consider, while the NPC continues to consider if these requirements should apply to existing buildings.
No, existing, to the conversion of historic buildings to different uses.
Anything else you're considering in your resolution?
Yes, and that the Borough Council also begin to implement recommendation 4. That
They do implement number
that they begin that they also implement recommendation number 4.
which is the Planning Commission recommends that the borough incentivize green building improvements to existing building stock.
Right.
Which could include mini grants or low interest revolving loan funds.
Right.
Eligibility and qualifying improvements would need to be determined at a future date.
Right. Sorry. If it's bourbon, bring me one. Okay. That capture everything we talked about? Okay, so I'm gonna have to wait for Jim.
It's an evolving subject, so we're gonna get another shot.
So all in favor of that resolution?
Aye.
Aye. Well, that's for Jim's vote when he gets back. Jen, how do you vote on that resolution? Jen, are you still there?
She's aye.
Okay, she's aye.
Aye.
So we have 6 ayes, and then we'll ask Jim what he thinks when he gets back. Okay, so the last 2 items, well, we have Saldo too, but we do need to talk, so let's try and get through these. What's that?
Nothing. I didn't say anything.
So the last 2 zoning items are mixed-use buildings in the 5A district and apartments in the 5B district.
Switch the order.
So we've actually looked at the apartments in the 5B district several times already. And I believe I've addressed all of the comments you've already made about this. Though I know Heidi has some reservations about this. We've added in, since you saw this last, 1 new requirement, which is to include at least 10% of the residential units be 550 square feet or smaller. The goal of this is to maintain diversity in our housing stock. So if we're allowing people to build apartment buildings and allowing them to build, in this case, 4 floors within the 45-foot shell, we should also ask them, in addition to meeting the green building standards, to have a mix of units, include some smaller units. I have had a number of conversations about whether we should have affordable housing requirements as opposed to this, and I can give you my feelings about that in detail, except that I will just simply say, as sympathetic as I am to that, I don't think it's practical from an administrative point of view for a municipality as small as Melbourne, unless and until we can create a compact with another municipality or there is a nonprofit or a county agency that we could work with to have these things happen. But on our own, administratively managing affordable housing program is not practical. So that's why instead of that, the requirement is just to have a diverse to have a variety of sizes of housing units.
Presumption being that smaller units are less expensive.
Potentially, yes, maybe not affordable, but less expensive. Affordable is another. And believe me, we'd love to get there, but on our own, I don't think we can. I should say that one thing that's actually left out in this language is that we did discuss was that within the 45-foot shell, you could build 4 stories instead of 3. That's something we discussed in our previous meeting, so I want to make sure that's added. It's 4 floors in a 45-foot
setback is only now 1 for 2.
Yeah, so we could talk about that too. You're right, Adam. That's consistent with what we have on Windsor Avenue. That's why it's like that. That's the only reason. If you're more comfortable with a different setback, that's okay.
It just seems a little shallow. 5 feet.
Yeah, I just felt that since we had that in Windsor Avenue, that's what we should have here. But if you'd rather have it be 1 for 1, that's okay too. That's the only reason it's like that. So we could discuss that a little further. So I guess let's start. We'll just go around and take comments on this or questions.
About gaming that ratio of the setback, I wouldn't know how to vote on that.
Well, can you think about the elm that has a 1 to 2?
Yeah.
1 to 2 what?
For every foot high it is above 35 feet, it has to be, that portion of the building has to be set back 2 feet from the street.
Negative, it's 2 feet of height is 1 foot of setback.
Yeah, they're right.
Yeah.
What he said.
Yeah, it's
So that's why it's not very deep.
right.
So is the goal to just not be seen from the street or just to be partially?
No, that there's a parapet line.
It's some
that last 4 steps back from the parapet line.
It softens the impact against the sky.
So if you're standing at the street, you see whatever, 2 floors, 3 floors, and then whatever's above that is
step back,
partially obscured.
Yeah.
I took a photo of the elm actually just yesterday. And
by the way, this is not just for streets. It's also on sides of lots that face residential districts. So
all around that.
Yeah.
Well, no, because one of the sides
because the back
can only be a side that faces a street or a residential district. So if a lot is adjacent to another lot in the 5B district, that side wouldn't have to set back.
But are the elm setbacks deeper than required on the corner?
That I don't know.
I can measure.
Well, okay, so if there's a way to kind of do a little further analysis on what that step back could be, we could agree we could look at that a little further.
Yeah, I should do that.
But do we agree that there should be a setback on the 3rd story? It's just a matter of what's the right ratio.
Right.
Yep. It's the right direction.
And that in the 5B district, the proper way to have a setback is from the street and from adjacent residential districts.
Right.
It's just the dimension.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Are there any other comments, concerns that anyone would like to raise about this? So this is where I'll invite public comment. So this is where we're talking about apartment buildings in the 5B district. And I have to apologize to you. I should have asked for public comment when we were doing the green building too.
That's okay.
Which I didn't do.
Yeah. But go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry. But I don't sense any questions from the commission, so we'll open up public comment. This is a proposal to allow apartment buildings in the 5B district.
Is that where we are? Is that where I am? 5B district?
No, you live in the adjacent district, which is.
But it is the lot you're talking about, the Price House.
The Price House is in 5B.
It's the lots along Montgomery Avenue, which would include the Price House one.
Do you want to
It's everything that's this light pink.
So take a look at the map,
You can
so
come
you
closer
can
to
understand where your house is in relation to this.
get her. So this kind of light pink is the 5B district. It's the main commercial part of Montgomery. And it's a lot, some of them are large, oddly shaped lots that go down parts of Meeting House Lane there and the same issue on Woodbine and a little bit right down.
But that's really the biggest one.
Well, this is the Aldrich, and this is the Price House, yes.
So what is the proposal? What are you?
So right now, you can build a 45-foot building that is a mixed-use building with commercial.
All right.
Commercial on the ground floor and apartments above. And this proposal is to allow people to build buildings that are only residential, just like apartments, that are the same height but have 4 stories in them. And it would only apply to properties that also have already have historic structure on them. And the purpose of that,
The only one.
there might be 1 or 2 others. The purpose of that is to provide people. So when we designate, when we tell someone they can't tear down their building, that means we're like taking away an ability to do something with their land, right? So in order to compensate them for that, we have to give them other options to use their land, because that's how America works. You can't just tell someone, like, sorry, you can't ever do
It's actually not a taking, just to be clear. We're not, it's not a taking.
No.
But we are, in order to preserve the Price House and make economic use of the property, we have to provide.
That's probably an option. So this gives more flexibility, and because we realize that probably an office building or commercial building is not the most appropriate thing next to a residential district. This allows people to build apartment buildings. So at least it's residential next to residential, which is better than an office building next to residential. So that's what this would allow in those circumstances. It would also allow 4 stories of use, but would not allow buildings that are any higher than those allowed now. Because right now you can build a 45-foot building.
What is a 45-foot? Is that like for
Well,
4 floors.
Normally it would be 4 floors, but the way the code's written is that you can have 45 feet, but only 3 stories, which is a little bit unusual.
And the reason for that is because we were thinking if it was an office building, people would want higher floor to ceiling. Right? If you want an office building, you want like 13, 14 feet. So we need to have higher buildings. But if you're building a residential building, you only need like 10 feet or 11 feet. So you can fit 4 stories. So that's why that is changing. But it's also to recognize that when you're asking someone to preserve a historical house, that's a burden, and this helps compensate people for the burden we're asking them to take on.
But they didn't know when they bought it.
No, actually, I'm not sure whether you knew when he bought it or not, because the historic district was just passed last August a year ago. So I'm not sure when he bought it. So that's what this is about. It's about giving a little bit more flexibility to people who have historic houses or buildings and they have to save money. And we're trying to give them flexibility in a way that balances our responsibility to do that with what we think will work best for the neighborhood. So that's why we're, for example, talking about the top floor has to set back, so you don't have a 4-story wall next to a house. And that's why we're talking about it has to set back from the street. It's looking about a 4-story wall up against the street. So those are the things we've been talking about. So that's without this, someone can come build a 3-story office.
They could.
Yes.
It could be, or they. Okay, so we don't want that.
No, or they could build a 3-story building like you're trying to build, which has like a gym on the ground floor and apartments above, which we don't think is the best solution. So what we're trying to do is come up with a better solution for properties like this, recognizing that Montgomery Avenue is next to a residential neighborhood, trying to somehow modulate them. But the problem is we can't do building. So what we're trying to do is the best we can So that's it. Do you have any questions or comments before we vote?
Well, I mean, you guys all know that, I mean, I'm sure you won't want it on your street, you know, you prefer to have a more residential, kind of presence on your street. It's already a bad spot, you know, Meeting House has historically been not a great, spot to reside on in terms of traffic. But Rite Aid there and people shooting through to get to where they need to go. It's definitely a throughway, you know what I mean? But
I propose my colleagues' comments here. If the planning commission could run the police department, we would.
well, they're not.
That's not what I said.
It's not. Well, there's no left turn out of Rite Aid, but it's not enforceable.
No, we're all aware of problems with cars misbehaving. They're not, maybe not the same as in your block.
It's drivers that misbehave.
Yeah, drivers and cars who misbehave. I mean, I live near State Line and Wynwood. I saw a woman get hit by cars that day. Just walking her dog. Someone was rushing to turn through and beat another car coming on and hit a lady walking her dog. I mean,
I saw a kid get hit today in Philadelphia.
so it happens.
Yeah.
And we would love to fix that.
Okay.
So,
But
so in terms of this recommendation, though, probably the neighbors would like the ability for that to be all residential, whatever, might go there rather than have to be commercial or office.
Well, they definitely prefer residential and not to be 4-story. I mean, right now we've had, you know, this open, I mean, we prefer to not have a big, there's nothing else on the street is 4-story.
This wouldn't increase the height, though. This would only allow, you know what I'm talking about? Like, it wouldn't be able to get taller.
Well, it actually.
It wouldn't be able to get taller than what's currently allowed,
Yeah.
not than what's currently built.
Well, the important change is that above 35 feet, so, you know, 35 feet is about a 3-story house, would be that high. Above that, well, two stories with the roof. Above that height, we're saying the building has to set back. And that's so that when you're standing on the ground and looking up, you can't even see that part of the building. It makes the building seem shorter, basically, because you can't really see that part of the building unless you're standing further away. And you know, you are on the south side of this parcel, so it's not an issue of shade, but it also creates the ability for a little more sunlight to get down and so on. So this is actually, if I understand correctly, intended to make the building less massive than it otherwise could be.
Which is what we definitely desire.
But is it allowing them to add a 4th floor, or it's still just staying within
the envelope? You cannot build you can't build higher than 45 feet, but you can build now. 45 feet was established because it's a reasonable height for a 3-story office building and commercial.
Yeah, we're not changing the number of.
So we're not changing that. What we're saying is, if you're building all residential, you can build 4 stories within that.
So you can build it, okay, so you can add 4. So the massing won't change, but they could get more apartments out of it. And that's to make the project feasible, which is to save the price house and make it, you know, anyway, so.
And, you know, frankly, thinking that there'll be new stores across the street, it will just create more lively pedestrian traffic, which will actually create an incentive to enforce the car rules more. That there's more people around.
So when these people bring another proposal, when is the spot where we would talk about like where on the lot they get to build, how much buffer?
When they come in for their preliminary plan.
This doesn't foreclose any of that.
No.
So this also doesn't address, did we recommend to change the definition of the rear lot line or whatever? Did that already come through us? No. So is that still an open issue?
It is, but
whether it's a side yard or a rear yard?
It is, but as you know, that became a complicated issue in our conversation. And so it's not part of this because I don't think we can resolve it. However, when an application comes in, we can talk with the applicant about how far the building sets back from different sides.
You can negotiate it, but it's not enforceable.
It just won't. Well, it's not in the code, but if we negotiate it and it's agreed, then it's enforceable.
Will this be a conditional use process?
Yeah.
It's all up in the air, right? It's all on the table?
Yeah, so to speak.
Okay. Right.
What's that?
Well, I wonder if it makes sense to try to put in the conditional use requirements, something about ensuring adequate setbacks from any existing adjacent residential buildings.
Well,
I mean,
I don't think that's objective enough.
No,
The zoning
and
code should have adequate setbacks, so.
but there was this issue with, is it a rear lot line or a side lot line?
That's right.
Causes this problem. I mean, I agree that writing that in there may not really get you what you
But
want.
I need to say, Adam and I debated this for half an hour at a previous planning commission meeting. We were not going to debate it now. Okay, because I will tell you, I can propose right now a 20-foot setback from an adjacent residential property. And Adam will say,
No, I'm not actually, you shouldn't assume that, just for the record.
what is our rear yard setback right now in the 5B district?
I think it says either 20 or 25 feet.
25, I think.
It might be 25. No, my concern was over like things like that. There's a parcel up the way that's really small. And it, like this, if you, right, you know what I mean? In other words, like, would there be any lot left in some of these weird lots, you know? There'd be nothing left. And you're like, well, we'll worry about that another time. So, I mean, maybe we'll worry about it another time.
Well, we can't worry about it tonight. So what I would say is, so it would, we can handle that during the process of evaluating an application. That's all I can say. Yeah.
But I think what Chloe is suggesting is if it's important to ensure minimum setbacks or massing, why isn't it specified?
Because we debated it at a meeting for a very long time.
No, that's, hang on. So, I mean, I realize I want to go home too a while ago, but I'm just saying, we don't have to say anything about rear yards and side yards. We could say something along the lines of
residential property.
Yeah, with a residential lot next door, you should have a minimum setback of X. And I think it also, frankly, it would give me more nuanced, and then we don't have to, this Todd's confident that the process will yield the result that we're hoping for. But you could say something like, you know, contiguous parcels at minimum of 15 and increasing by X for every vertical feet or something, you know, I mean. So as you go higher, you should set back more is the basic idea.
So I would probably debate that a little bit, that particular metric. So let me just take the pulse here. Do you feel it's worth incorporating this in tonight, something like this, and then we should hash it out? Or do you feel like we should table it and deal with it later?
I think we should table everything else. I'm done.
Well, I'm afraid we...
Yeah.
This is what happens when we, you know, so... I would really like... So first of all, council needs to vote on the salvage tonight.
Gotten too late time. Salva's fine. We're out of time.
Well, is there any reason not to vote on the South?
I'm happy with the way it is.
Yeah, that's what it should say.
Yeah, I think we should.
No discussion.
All right, well, let's get through this, then we can vote on the salvage. So my question is, it doesn't sound like anyone wants to tackle this tonight, so we'll table this for tonight. And we've gotten this far with one.
Sorry, can I ask one question about it while we're on it, so I don't forget it? If by allowing a fully residential building on this lot, does it become a residential lot? And what is that? It doesn't?
No, it's, the zoning district doesn't change.
Okay, thank you, okay.
The conditional.
So it's still going to be subject to residential, the setback from the residential district? Yes?
Subject to the same setbacks as the rest of the 5B district, unless something is written.
But you could be more restrictive with the conditional use process is the point.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So, at least on this one, I'd like to know if we can make a resolution on this one tonight.
I think it's fine. I mean, I think we could, if you don't want to continue to discuss whether it should be little tweaks or whatever, but it's an improvement over what's.
Well, we're going to tweak the setback maybe. But otherwise, no, we'd like to ask if we have a resolution on this to either approve or not approve it.
But still discuss the setback thing.
We could continue to look at that too. Yes.
And also, now this is for both of these items, the
No,
proposed, just on the proposed 5A,
just 5B right now.
just 5B in here right now, okay,
We'll have to table 5A because that will be a long conversation too.
okay.
So can someone make a resolution about 5B district proposals? I'll make a resolution. So I'm going to make a resolution that we recommend council that they adopt provisions for apartment buildings in the 5B district as presented, and that we continue to tweak the amount of setbacks from the adjacent residential districts and the setbacks for the 4th story.
Okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye, thank you, Jen. Okay, so let's move on then. We'll table 5C, move on to the Saldo. We have been presented with draft ordinance. As you know, that means it's already been through exhaustive review, many rounds of comments, and this is simply the form of the new Saldo that is presented for legislation. It is the same as what we've seen before, except that bicycle parking requirements it's the dimensional, it's the design requirements for bicycle parking, right? Yeah. Are in there now, but you will be reserving bicycle parking requirements for the zoning code, right?
Yes.
There's a whole section of potential zoning changes that would need to be made that would be consistent with Saldo, which I think we will need to tackle in a subsequent meeting. But as for tonight, does anyone not want to vote on this right now? Are you all comfortable voting with recommending the adoption of the ordinance that's been presented to us?
Yeah.
I think it is so close to perfection.
That's what they think you do. It's whistle clean.
Lift a glass, a globe, for having done this.
That way,
That's what I wish I did.
All in favor of recommending the council, public comment. All in favor of voting to approve the ordinance adopting the Saldo. Clay, I'm sorry. Anything you would like to say about this?
No, I'm good.
You want a second?
These may be famous last words, you know.
Who would like to move that motion? You'll move that in the second. All in favor of recommending the
Further comment? You're not going to ask if there's further
You
comment?
guys,
No further comment.
all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Chloe, congratulations.
Thank you. I need to say one brief thing about the zoning revisions, which is that I spoke with your solicitor who has thoroughly reviewed all of Saldo, and he feels that there is some urgency to trying to get the zoning revisions that go along with the Saldo to ensure consistency of terminology and other things, that those go soon, right? That we don't just sit on the accompanying zoning revisions that ensure consistency for a long time. So I realize that's like an agenda and a discussion issue. I did send those out on Friday.
So we can review that for next month.
So please, it's not that long compared to the whole Saldo. It's just some amendments to the zoning, and they do include requirements for bicycle parking. So exciting. So
It's only 16 pages.
take a look at that, and we'll talk about it hopefully next time.
Okay. Okay. I will take that as a motion to adjourn.
Seconded.
Second. All in favor of adjourning? Thank you all for all your hard work last night. Not just today, but in all the conversations we've had.
Every time you very much stepping. This is a 5